Hello, hello, and happy marvelous Monday, everybody. I hope that you are well. I'm super excited to join you today, have you to join me today. Today is part two, as we are talking about resolving tenant disputes without stress. This is part two. This is a recap. I'm going to share some of the information that I shared last week, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper into some strategies that I believe will be a lot of help for many of you who are property managers or property owners. I am Carissa Span, the landlord and tenant coach. For those of you who are tuned into my channel for the very first time, thank you so much. For those of you who are watching the replay, thank you, thank you, thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So today I'm sharing the industry's best tips and practices. I'm doing a recap. I will answer questions as long as I am live and on the air. So by all means, if you have questions, please don't be afraid. Go ahead and drop it in the comment section. Welcome those of you who are tuned in on my YouTube channel. I see you coming in. Thank you. I'm also live on LinkedIn as well as Facebook. This is what I do each and every Monday. I'm right here at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm sharing information. Usually I'm sharing information for landlords, for tenants, and the entire rental community. Well, today is part two of resolving tenant disputes. So it's all about landlords, property owners, helping you to better manage and handle your rental property business. So what I want you to do is show me some love in the comment section. Let me know where you're tuned in from. I love to know where my viewers are tuned in from. I do want to share a disclaimer. Information that I'm providing is not legal advice. The information that I'm sharing today is, as I've indicated, is the industry's best tips and practices. I do not profess to be an attorney because I am absolutely far from that. I am a licensed property manager. I have been in the property management space for over 2 decades now. Also, I'm a property management educator. So that is my lane. That is my space. I will not give legal advice. If you do have legal questions, I would advise you to always speak to a reputable landlord and tenant attorney. So I'm going to get right into the discussion today. And again, this is part two. So I do want to pick up from where I left off last week. I did have some questions that came in. And so stay tuned for those of you who sent me your questions in advance. I'm going to answer all of your questions today while I'm live and on the air. And that's the beauty and the benefit about catching me every Monday. If you have questions, I'll answer your questions when I'm live and on the air. I know that I have a large population of tenants who tune in. So if you are a tenant, if you do have questions, although this segment may not cover questions that you may have, don't be afraid. Drop your comment or your question in the chat box, and I will definitely respond to those questions. All right, so I'm going to get straight into it. I do have a lot of information that I want to cover. All right, let's go here. Hello, preacher. Thank you so much for tuning in. All right, we have investors who are here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I do hope that if any information that I'm sharing today, if you find it helpful or of value, please please tag someone else who can benefit from this information. Share it with others. Is that all right? Like, tag, share. Like, tag, and share, because ultimately I want to get this information out to as many people as possible. And honestly, it costs you nothing but your time to show up and get this free information. I promise that in 2025, things are going to look a lot different for many people, many landlords, many property owners, many investors. Things are going to look a lot different this year. There are going to be a lot of tenants who are looking to move. I want to make sure that before you sign that lease for your next tenant, that you understand the things that are taking place, that you understand the changes that have already happened. So that's why it's important to stay tuned, because I'm always going to give you updates and information. Because when it comes to real estate, and many of you who have been in this space for a while, many of you are investors, right? You are developers. One thing that you can agree with me on is this: real estate is never ending. The laws are always changing. What may apply today may not be applicable tomorrow. So I'm always sharing information to help the entire rental community. All right, so let me get into my recaps from last week because I want to share some of the biggest takeaways. And let me start there. All right, so please keep your questions and your comments coming in, and I am definitely going to come back to you. So I just want to do a recap from last week. Excuse me, I'm not sure why my voice is raspy today, but I'm not going to allow that to stop me. All right. So last week I touched on, and that was part one from last week. I touched on resolving tenant disputes and conflicts. Um, so perhaps if I share this with you first, you'll understand why I'm doing a recap and why I am giving these strategies today. I know that many of you who tune in, you've heard me talk about lawsuits that have been filed against owners, right? Rental property owners. And I talked about tenants who have complaints. And sometimes when those issues are not resolved, unfortunately, tenants will, unfortunately for owners, let me just say, unfortunately for those of you who are owners, your property managers, sometimes when those issues are not resolved, one of the first things that a tenant will do is contact an attorney. Tenants do have rights. It doesn't matter where that rental property is located. Tenants do have rights all throughout the United States. And from one jurisdiction, from one state to the next, the laws may be very different. They could be similar. In many cases, they may be the same. But you should always understand what your responsibility is when you are an owner of rental property. And just because you may have a property manager managing that rental property or that business for you, it does not excuse you. It does not negate the fact that laws are in place. Some of you have property managers who are not doing the best job. Now, I'm going to ask this question, and perhaps my answer is in the question that I'm asking. If you have a property manager managing your tenants, managing your rental property, managing that asset, and they're not doing what they're supposed to do, they're not the best, they're not user friendly, why do you pay them to be a headache for you? Okay. And that answer is in the question. Do you really need a headache? Do you really need to pay somebody to be a pain? Do you need to pay someone who is putting you and your rental property in a space asking for tenants to file a lawsuit against you and your property? Because just because the property manager is at fault, again, it does not excuse you. Tenants can sue your property manager. They can also file a claim and sue you as well as the owner. So that's why you always want to know and understand what the laws are. So that's why I want to do this recap so that you'll know how to better respond to or resolve situations. Now, if you have a property manager who is managing and maybe they have not been the greatest, maybe they have had complaints filed or reported by the tenants, maybe share the information that I'm going to provide you today. Okay, so let me get into the quick recap from last week because we have a lot to cover today. All right, so last week I talked about filling those vacants, right? We know that bricks and mortars don't pay rent. I talked about some strategies that you can use to quickly fill those vacant rentals. The one thing that you never, ever want to happen is to have a vacant property that's been sitting for more than 30 days. Now, for some of my clients, you already know that 30 days is too long. But for those of you who are not in that space, I would say your rental property should never be vacant for more than 30 days. Okay? And if it is, you want to look at the policy that either you're using or your property manager is using. Last week, I also talked about ensuring that you have a rent collection process in place to quickly receive the rent payment, meaning that some are only allowing tenants to pay the old and the traditional way, which may be by check, cashier's check, or money order. There are a lot of online platforms. A lot of tenants can pay their rent just by using their phone through an app. So you want to make sure that you have a rent collection policy in place that allows the tenants to quickly pay their rent. I talked about the day-to-day property management and the systems that you must have in place so that you're able to communicate with your tenants, make sure those maintenance requests and repairs are taken care of timely. So those are just the high level, very brief um, strategies that I shared on last week. So today I'm going to get into it because, again, I have a lot to cover today. So thank you again so much. I see your comments coming in. I'm on different platforms, so you may see me looking away, but I'm looking at the various platforms to make sure that I'm ascertaining questions and comments that are coming in, along with text messages, because people will text me their questions. They're not able to, for some reason, I'm not sure why, but some are not able to drop their questions in the comment section. So they're texting me their questions. All right, so I'm going to get into it. And if I'm going too fast, please slow me down. Okay. All right. So last week, like I said, we talked about the proactive strategies. We talked about those rental lease agreements and making sure that they're clear, making sure that you have strong communication. I talked about making sure and how important it is to have proper documentation. And so today I'm just going to go a little bit deeper because let's be real, disputes are going to happen. Like I said last week, disputes are inevitable. It's something that we sometimes deal with. Some are manageable, some are extremely stressful. But some of these solutions, I promise you that if you take it, you write down your notes today, you put in your backpack for tomorrow, it may come in handy somewhere down the line. So what I want to know is, for those of you who are managing your property, or perhaps others are managing it for you, let me know what is or what has been one of the most frustrating tenant disputes that you've had, because I want to address some concerns. So it may not be something that I'm sharing today, but if it's something that you've experienced or you've encountered, even if you're watching a replay, drop it in the comment section for me. All right. So today I just want to go a little bit deeper. The first thing I want to touch on today is the emotional tenant. We know that sometimes, for those of you who've been in this space as long as I have, let's just be real. Let's be honest. We're just having this one-on-one conversation today, right? It's just you and I here. That emotional tenant. I know that can be a pain when you have a tenant who reacts out of frustration. Okay. They're acting out of frustration. They're stressed. And then sometimes, check this, sometimes you'll find that emotional behavior from tenants, even when they're having a financial hardship, because sometimes it's uncomfortable for tenants to not be able to pay rent. Now, some tenants do really care about maintaining a good record of paying their rent on time. And when they're having a financial hardship, I found that some are embarrassed, some are ashamed, and they'll act out. So one of the things that you can do, here's what I will always recommend. I was on a live this morning, and the speaker said, just stay calm. And I thought that was so fitting. And so that's one of the first things that I'm definitely going to recommend. If you have a tenant acting out, emotional, for whatever reason, always remain calm. You don't have to match that energy. At the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, and at all times throughout the day, we are professionals. And there is no reason to match energy. You never know what a person has going on. There could be some mental health issues. They could be having some sort of meltdown. They could experience some sort of crisis in life. And you don't know why that behavior is displayed. So you don't want to match that behavior. So remain calm. Stay professional. You always want to acknowledge their concerns. Sometimes tenants want to know that they actually have your attention. And sometimes maybe they just need to talk. Maybe they just need to get things off of their chest. Hey, Ms. Robinson, thank you so much for tuning in. And when you do that, you also want to offer clear solutions, right? And so if they have a concern, let's say, for instance, there are some maintenance issues. Maybe you forgot to take care of those repairs for them and they're really upset. They're irate. They're just spiraling out of control emotionally. They're cussing and they're cursing and they're doing all manner of things, right? Remain calm, address their concerns, let them know that I apologize, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant. We haven't taken care of your broken toilet. We're going to get someone in there this week. Like, you give them the timeline. Now, you don't provide fluff. You don't lie, right? Don't stretch the truth. Just be honest. If you made the mistake, one of the things that I always share in class is this: admit it, explain it, and resolve it, versus not being clear and not sharing with the tenants what they can expect. When can they expect the repairs to be completed? When can they expect the pest control to take place? All right. Now let's talk about, for a second here, the tenant who likes to manipulate. So true story. I had a young lady. She was just moving into the area. She was relocating from Midwest somewhere. She was in one of the housing programs. It wasn't the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher program. It was another short-term temporary program. She didn't really understand the process of moving in. And I tried to explain to the young lady that we had to wait for a housing inspection to take place, very similar to the voucher program. And so this young lady, she told me, well, that's not how it works. An inspection doesn't have to be completed, doesn't have to be done before I move in. I can move in and then they'll do the inspection. So I'm trying to explain to the young lady how the program works, right? And she didn't like my response. So she actually contacted an authoritative office to file a complaint against me because we would not allow her to move in. And I wasn't upset. I didn't get bent out of shape, because sometimes here's the thing. When people are ignorant and they don't know the truth, sometimes they'll make things up or they'll try to manipulate the situation. But I promise that it is never, ever, ever in your best interest to respond or to return that energy. Here's what I do know: what you feed will grow and what you starve will die. And so if you feed it on that level, you're not really going to get far. So I remain professional. I try to remain as calm as possible and let her know that although, she's not in the program that she thought she was going to have, the process is still the same. I went on to explain to the young lady that I was very familiar with the program. Um, haven't been in this space. I worked in affordable housing pretty much my entire career, so I might know a little bit something, right? And I did let her know that unfortunately, we could not allow her to move in. And she hemmed and she hawed and she complained. And at the end of the day, I'm sharing with you strategies that worked, because sometimes you may go through these things. You may encounter tenants who would try to manipulate the situation. Even if you have a tenant who, let's say, for instance, it's a current tenant. They're in your rental property. They're complaining about you not making repairs. They're complaining about this. They're complaining about that. They're complaining about their neighbors and smoking and the barking dog and all these things, right? Sometimes the things that are beyond your control, you cannot change. And even if you try to convey that and explain that to them, sometimes they will take that and still not appreciate it. But let's go to the next tenant. So the tenant who likes to avoid you, right? The tenant who will ignore issues, not pay their rent, not respond to those letters of non-payment of rent. They're not responding to those lease violations, right? They don't respond to calls or emails. They don't respond to knocks on the doors. You can always definitely 100% guarantee that this tenant's behavior may not change, but there's a way that you can handle the situation that will minimize the stress. So one of the things that I always do is I will send documentation, send it in writing. If that is your practice, if that is your policy, if there's a violation, send a notice. If it's your policy to send an email, send an email. If it's your policy to send a text message, because that is also written documentation, that's a form of written documentation, send those messages. So essentially what you are doing and what you want to do is create a paper trail. You want to make sure that you are setting firm deadlines. And here's why paper trails are important. If you have to go to court, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove, right? And so if you have no documentation, if you cannot present to the judge that you've tried to communicate with the tenant, that you've tried to resolve it to the best of your professional ability, if you have no proof, then you are not doing yourself a good service. All right. So now let's talk about the aggressive tenant. I know that some of you, this will resonate with some of you, the aggressive tenant. They give you nothing but pushback. They push back on all the rules. They make threats. They are always causing disturbances, not just to you, not just to the other tenants, but also just the entire rental community. Now, you can't control that behavior as well, right? But what you can do is keep your interactions brief. If you feel like your life is in danger, if you know for a fact that this tenant can spiral out of control, there is some sort of physical altercation that could take place, you want to remove yourself from that threat and you want to enforce your policies consistently. Don't enforce it 1 month here, another month there, and not do it consistently, because that will be sending a message or a flag that you're inconsistent. And so whatever they want to do, they can do. So you must understand why and how important it is to be consistent with your policies. And then if you need to get legal involved, an attorney, the police, law enforcement, you can definitely do those things. I've managed some rental communities in low income parts of the DC metropolitan area. And one community in particular, the community was so bad that they would do drive-by shootings in broad daylight, like in the middle of the day. Now, one of the things that I had to do in that community was get the police involved. So I reached out to the police chief, the PSA individuals. We had meetings with law enforcement, with security. We had meetings with officials at HUD, with other community liaisons, because I recognize that it would take a village to help make an impact, a positive impact in that rental community. But I didn't stop there. I walked the community. I literally walked. I knocked on doors. I spoke to tenants. I had to learn who was who. I wanted them to see my face. I wanted them to understand that as a housing professional, my job and my role is to always to make sure that their home was decent, safe, and sanitary, meaning that I had a role to play. I had to make sure that repairs were taken care of, and repairs that have been so deplorable, like some of those tenants had lived in conditions for so long, and I could not understand why the prior or how the prior two property managers would allow tenants to live in the conditions that they lived in for so long. And so I had to apologize for what was not done and assure them that I was going to be responsible for taking care of it. I had to let them know that I had an open door policy. I gave them my cell phone number so that they can contact me, my email address, because I wanted them to know how serious I was in improving their rental home. But that also they had to understand that although they do have rights, they also have responsibilities. And if there were some lease violations going on, I would point that out and let them know, listen, we both have a part to play. We both have roles that we can hold each other accountable to and for, right? And so it sometimes may take a village, but you cannot be afraid to do something different. All right. So let me just go to, remember I talked about that emotional tenant, right? Because sometimes emotions, like I said, they're out of control. You don't really know from one moment to the next how a tenant is going to be respond. But I promise you this, that if you let tenants break small rules, they'll test the bigger ones. So you want to make sure that you are sticking to your lease. You want to know what is in your rental lease agreement. You want to understand it, and you want to be able to have a conversation with the tenants without having to look at that lease verbatim. So know what is in your rental lease policy. It is a policy, it's a written document, but it's a contract. It is a legally binding contract. All right. And you also want to make sure that you are separating your emotions from the business. Don't wear your emotions on your sleeve. Yeah, you can be understanding, right, without being a pushover, right? Because ultimately, your lease is your shield and you definitely want to use it. Okay. So, because that lease document is a contract, you don't have to get bent out of shape. Refer the tenant to the lease. Even if they don't agree with what you're saying, refer them to the language that is in that lease. So, for instance, maybe it's, let me go to pest control. I've shared previously how in my lease agreement, it tells tenants that when it comes to pest infestation, they are responsible for reporting. They're responsible for reporting issues within 5 days. So it doesn't matter if it's a roach, a bed bug, an ant, a spider, a mouse, whatever. They're responsible for reporting their issues within 5 days. Because here's the thing, I want to promptly know what the issue is or the issues are so that we can get on top of it, get a pest control company out there as soon as possible to take care of the problem. Because what happens when that doesn't take place? The problem won't go away. And then it will likely become infestation, right? So infestation is defined as two or more. So in a situation where a tenant just refuses to tell me that they have roaches, they have bed bugs, we go out or we get a report that the tenants have this infestation issue. Now we can go back to the lease and point out in the lease that they were supposed to notify us within 5 days of realizing that there's an issue. Because if there is a larger financial situation that comes out of an exterminator having to go back once, twice, 3 times to get rid of the issue, somebody has to pay that cost. And if the tenant doesn't report it, then they're responsible. We're going to make sure that it's taken care of. But financially, that is the tenant's financial responsibility. But I can only implement what is in writing. I can only enforce, rather, what is in writing. And it's very hard to enforce something that does not exist. So if it's not in your lease, it doesn't exist. If you haven't notified the tenant, if it's not in writing, you have no proof. And so that's why you want to make sure that it is in your lease and that you refer to the lease. Okay. So I know that sometimes tenants may say, well, can I pay the rent late just this one time? Listen, life happens, and life is life. And for a lot of people are having financial situations. 2025, a lot more people may have financial situations. So what you can do is let the tenant know or say something like, listen, I understand, that things happen, but my policy is the same for everyone. That if you pay your rent late, you will have to pay a late fee after the due date. And you want to tell them if the rent is due on the 1st, okay, the rent is due on the 1st, we will only impose a late fee if it's paid after the 5th. So if it's paid after the 5th, then maybe on the 6th or the 10th or whatever that date is for you, let the tenant know we will only enforce a late fee if your rent payment is made after this date. And allow the tenant to make the decision. But you don't give them permission to pay the rent late. Now, if you don't, let's say you don't charge them a late fee, and I know that some of you don't, and that's fine if that's your policy. But you want to make sure that you have strategies, you have policies in place that will help you when tenants do these things. All right. You want to make sure that your communication is clear, it's concise, and it is professional at all times. So that's why, even if you have a conversation with your tenant, I always say follow up in writing. Send an email, send a letter. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, it was so great speaking with you today. This is just a recap of our conversation. So I'm going to send an email. I'm going to type up a letter, just recapping the conversation that we spoke today or we met today regarding ABC, XYZ. Here's what came out of it, right? Just want to do a recap and put that in the tenant's file, because I would rather you do that. I would rather you have that written documentation saved somewhere, because you may need it. And it's better to have it and not need it versus needing it and not having it. All right. So when it comes to strategies for handling those common issues, such as the late rent payment, I always recommend to offer a structured repayment agreement plan if it is far beyond, let's say, 3, 4, 5 months. I do have some owners who are watching, and they have tenants in their rental portfolio. Their tenants are delinquent by more than 4 months. And so if you allow your tenants to pay your rent to you late fee imposed or not, and you not take them to court, I would still offer this suggestion to provide some sort of structured repayment agreement, meaning that, okay, so if they pay, let's say they lost their job. Okay, sometimes people do. Sometimes people may switch positions. They may switch roles. And when that happens, there may be a period where they can't pay their rent. And I know that some of you will allow your tenants to stay in the rental property, whereas you're not taking them to court. And again, if that is your practice, that's fine. But consider this. If you allow your tenant to do that, how are they going to pay the rent? How are they going to catch up? One of the things that I would take a look at is, what can they afford? Okay, so when they get back on their feet, can they pay the rent plus 10%? You want to just make sure that whatever you allow them to do, that they can afford it. Okay, but don't allow it to become a habit of them not paying the rent. And don't allow it to become a habit where you're not taking action. All right. You want to always use automated reminders. So if you are able to send text messages, schedule your text messages to go out before the 1st. Maybe have those reminders to go out on the 25th of the month, the prior month. So we're in February, right? So let's say February 25th, you set reminders for you to send, or you actually set or schedule text messages or emails to go out to your tenants to say, hey, the 1st is coming. It's almost time to pay your rent. So send them reminders, put it on an automatic schedule. If you have an online tenant portal, I know that many of you already know this, capitalize off of what you already have. Okay. Enforce those late fees consistently. All right. When it comes to those repeated lease violations, you always want to issue that tenant a notice, letting them know, hey, listen, this is a violation of the lease. This is a no smoking community. We have a no pet policy. Whatever the violation is, identify it, put it in writing. That's the first thing that you always want to do. Now, if they ignore it, you can always send them a notice to cure or quit, a notice to vacate, or whatever the notice is in your specific jurisdiction where that rental property is. And then after that, if there's still a problem, then it can be escalated and it has to go to the court, right? So when it comes to maintenance complaints, and I'm coming to your comments, thank you so much. So when it comes to those maintenance complaints, that's one of the biggest issues, and that never seems to end. That is like an ongoing issue. When you have maintenance requests, you should always have a system in place. You want to make sure that everything is documented. Some of you are using property management softwares. That's great. Some of you are not, but you should still have some sort of system in place, even if it's a physical log where you're writing down the tenant in apartment A called today to complain about her her tub is backing up. The tenant in apartment C or the tenant in the basement unit, they complain about the ceiling fan. They complain about the smoke detector beeping or chirping, right? Document, identify, and make sure that you have a system in place so that you can follow up. All right. You also, as I indicated a little bit earlier, you want to set those clear expectations. When can tenants expect the repairs to be completed? Because here's the thing, not every request is an emergency. I know that some tenants, they'll call today for maybe their garbage disposal works, but it's making noise. Or perhaps they have 2 bathrooms and the sink in one of the bathrooms is starting to back up, or there's a slow drain. That's not an emergency because they have another bathroom that they can use, right? So you always want to identify what emergencies are versus regular routine or maintenance complaints. But by all means, if there is an emergency, you want to take care of it right away, right? Now, if the tenant is overly demanding, and some can be, remind them of their lease terms. Remind them of their responsibilities if they have any at all. So I've had some tenants who were responsible for changing their HVAC filter. And they would always call to say, well, Carissa, it's time for my filter to be changed. Can you send someone out? And I would have to remind them that the filter replacement is not the responsibility of the owner. The filter replacement is your responsibility, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant. I could send you a picture of what the filter looks like, maybe give you some suggestions of where you can buy it from. And then I'm also going to remind them and follow up to see if they actually replaced it. Now, let me pause on that because when it comes to those filters, and I know that some tenants may be responsible for replacing those filters, but what happens when they don't replace those filters? Because if, let's say it's the summertime, right? And the tenant hasn't replaced the filter, they're complaining that their AC isn't working, or maybe the AC, it doesn't get as cold, right? Then perhaps there's an issue because maybe they haven't changed the filter or some other issues. But you want to make sure that even if it is the tenant's responsibility, you want to make sure that they're on top of what they're supposed to do. Don't just give them the responsibility to replace the batteries in the smoke detector, only for you to go on the property and realize, oh, they took all the smoke detectors down. That would be a big issue if a fire broke out and they received no warning that there was a fire in the place. Then all of a sudden, the whole place go up in smoke. So follow up with tenants. Make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to do and be consistent even with that. All right. I have some questions that have come in, but I'm going to pause. All right. Preacher, let me come to you here. I put my laundry room issues on my property manager, told them they were not doing their part, making sure that things are being done according to my contract. Last 3 days, tenants cleaning up their mess wasn't an issue. That is so heartbreaking. Especially when you have a property manager, when you're paying someone to take care of your rental property and they're not doing it. That is so heartbreaking. Well, let me ask this question. With your property manager, what metrics do you have in place? Do you use like a rubric system for evaluating the effectiveness and the professionalism of this property manager? Because if you don't have a rubric system in place, um, sometimes it can be challenging when you're having these conversations and then the problem doesn't go away and it still keep coming back and you keep seeing the same thing over and over and over. So do you have a rubric or metric system in place to grade the or to evaluate how effective or how good that property manager is? If you don't, then maybe now is a good time to consider, have a conversation with your property manager. Let them know, listen, this is a concern that I have. I really need you to get on top of this. I really need you to make sure that the laundry room is clean, that it's closed at a certain time, if that's your policy. I don't know what the policies are, right? But you want to remind them of whatever your policy is and let them know, listen, are you able to, like, these are the requirements. This is what I'm expecting out of you. Do you think you're able to fulfill this requirement? Do you think that you're able to continue to manage the property? Because this is a big issue for us, and we want to make sure that we can get this resolved timely. So I had that conversation with them, then also let them know that in the very near future, you're going to implement a rubric system for evaluating them, right? Because you can always replace a property manager and remove, I said a little bit earlier, remove your emotions, right? So take a step back. It is a business. Treat your business like a business and it will pay you like a business. If you treat it like a hobby, it's going to pay you like a hobby. So have that conversation with your property manager. Let them know what your expectations are. And if there is improvement, good. If there's not improvement, then maybe now start considering other property managers, consider other property management companies, because I promise that is not the only one. And if they are having the same issue, the same subject matter, then maybe that's an area that they're struggling in. And let me just assure you, as a property management educator, one of the things that I do in my property management class, I teach people how to get into the industry, and I help those who are in the industry become better, to grow and expand. One of the things that I can honestly say is that all property managers are not created the same. They're not all equal. So you have some who have the capacity to grow, and others have no desire to grow. So from whatever spectrum that property manager falls in line with, that's what you have to go with. Can they grow? Can they improve? And then do they have the capacity to grow or improve? And if not, it's not personal, it's business, because you don't want to send a message to your tenants that the behavior is okay when it is not. All right. Thank you for your comment. I have a point system that is graded quarterly along with the maintenance and inspections. Plus, I look at the camera every week. I wish more property owners were as thorough as you are. I'm going to give you 2 thumbs up. All right. So with that, I would just say, just follow up with that property manager. Let them know what your concerns are. And I'm sure you've already given them room to make improvements. And if they're not making improvements, listen, it's not personal, it is business. Now, it can be a little bit challenging if it's somebody that you know, somebody that you've grown to love on a professional level, someone that you care about, right? But you got to remember that it is your business. It's your rental property business. And that at all costs, they are getting paid to protect, to preserve, and to maintain that asset. That is exactly what it is. It is an asset. And unfortunately, everybody, listen, I talked about the community that I manage, right? That in broad daylight, they did drive-by shootings. Everybody can't work in that environment. And that's a true story. One day I was walking across the courtyard. I think in that community it was like 272 doors I was managing. In broad daylight, I'm getting ready to deliver some notices just to let tenants know that they can expect some repairs in the next week for the entire building. We were just going through and renovating the building. And as I'm walking across the courtyard, Two guys, they come out, they were arguing, and they pulled out guns. One was standing to my right, and the other was standing to my left. And I'm like right dead in the middle. I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do here. It's a little awkward. A tenant, she came out and she says, y'all just gonna do that in front of the rent office lady? So she was like, come on, Miss Carissa, come on, Miss Carissa. So we left the scene of the situation. They're still arguing. Everybody don't have the capacity to do that. And it's okay. People recognize their strength. People recognize, you know what? That is not my lane. Okay. And it is okay. So going back to you, preacher, if your property manager cannot do it, then maybe it's not her lane. And it's okay. It's not personal. It's business. Just move on to find something that does work for that rental property, and making sure that the tenants are getting the right message that the violations are not okay. Because if your property manager is not doing that for you, then unfortunately, they are sending a message that it is okay for the behavior to continue. I've seen lots of things go on in the laundry room, smoking and physical things that shouldn't be happening, right? The laundry rooms are left open, and sometimes tenants don't even care that the cameras are on, or maybe they don't even know that they're being watched, right? And so you have to make sure that you stay on top of those things. So thank you for that. And I'm glad that you do have that point system in place to measure that property manager, to measure the maintenance as well as inspections, because that really does mean a lot. And I wish a lot more people did that. So I hope that somebody is watching live or will watch the replay who's not doing that will consider taking on or adopting that policy that you have. All right. So thank you so much for that. A couple more things here as I'm wrapping up. I do want to make sure that I emphasize the importance of customizing whatever your strategy is for your rental business. And if you need help, I'm here. I'm going to give you my email address. I did share a few weeks ago that I'm going to be doing some live and virtual webinars and workshops this year. It's going to be probably around April, somewhere in that time frame. We're still working out the kinks and looking at space for those who are in the DC metropolitan area. And if you are interested, I'm going to give you my email address. If you have questions, please feel free to email me. All right. I know that I'm live every Monday at 7:30 p.m. and I try to share as much information as possible. I do get a lot of calls. I get a lot of emails, and I want to make sure that I'm able to provide quality, right? And sometimes I repeat information because a lot of similar questions continue to come up over and over and over. And so this year, as I'm breaking down the various topics and the subjects, inspections, how to conduct inspections, maintenance, how to make sure you have a policy in place, not just a policy, but a policy that is best for your rental property. How often are you conducting inspections? Do you know how to conduct inspections? Or if someone is responsible for doing those things for you, how are they doing it and how are you grading it? And just going through that process, breaking it down and showing you how to do it, what to expect, what to look for, when to throw in the towel, right? If you're self-managing and getting someone to manage it for you, right? So just going through all those things, right? So I want to make sure that I give you, before I even roll it out, before I give the website, I want to make sure that you know what's coming down the pipe, because it's a lot of good things that's taking place. Like I said, 2025 is going to be different for a lot of people. A lot of tenants are going to be moving, and I want you to know how important it is to capture all of the information that you need to have before that new tenant moves in or before that tenant moves out, right? So before you close out the business, before you open up the doors to new business, what you must have in place. So I want you to keep coming back, stay connected with me. If you have not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please make sure that you do that. My YouTube channel, you can find me, Landlord Life. Life is spelled with a Y. Please subscribe. You can always watch those replays there. And I do respond to the comments that come in on my YouTube channel. So if you don't want to email me, you can always leave a comment on that YouTube channel. I go back and I do follow up. I did cover a lot today, so I'm going to do a quick recap, but let me give you my email address as I bring this segment to a close here. And I thank you for your time. Thank you for rocking with me today. This is my email address at the bottom of the screen there. All right, all right, there's one other thing I do want to share. Oh, no, I do have some questions. I do apologize. All right, so I have a couple of questions that came in. Someone is asking, um, what's the best way to deal with a tenant who refuses to leave after a lease ends? Okay, the best way to deal with a tenant who refuses to leave when the lease ends is to take the tenant to court. So in some jurisdictions, unlike DC, because when in DC, when the lease ends, it automatically roll over to month. All right. And in that situation, and in all situations, you have to take the tenant to court. You cannot just walk in and put the tenant out. Please don't change the locks. Please don't disconnect the utilities if you're responsible for paying the utilities. All right. Take the tenant to court. Don't argue. Take the tenant to court. Give them notice. Listen, they gave notice that they were moving. Now they're holding over. You want to take them to court as quickly as humanly possible. Great question. One other question here. How do I handle a tenant who keeps calling me for small and petty things? Well, I don't know that you can get a tenant to stop contacting you or calling you for those things. But what I will say is this: sometimes if you give a clear timeline on when repairs are going to be completed and you actually stick to it, in some cases, it may help. Now, might be a small stretch here, but let's say, for instance, you do all of that, right? You notify your tenants, you let them know, you give them a timeline, and you usually stick to it, and yet they still continue to call. It is okay to let them know, with Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, we're going to take care of your stove. We're going to replace the stove. We're going to replace the refrigerator. We're going to come and paint. We're going to come and replace the carpet within 5 business days. And let them know, you don't have to keep calling. We're going to come. If we don't come by that day, then please give me a call back. It is okay to politely and professionally say those things. Great question. All right, another question here. Should I give second chances, or should I stick to lease enforcement no matter what? Great question. Well, I would say look at that on a case by case basis, because I have had situations where I've given people a second chance. Their credit may not have been the best. Maybe they did have an eviction on their record, but it was because they went through divorce or they went through something in life beyond their control, but they had the financial means to pay. In situations like that, I would strongly look at what you can and cannot do. So now if you have someone who, let's say the rent is $3,000. No, let me just say the rent is $1,000. And it is an applicant. Their only source of income, let's say, is from Social Security, and they get rent is $1,000. They get $1,200 a month from Social Security. Under no stretch of the imagination would I even consider allowing a tenant to move in. Why? I'm glad you asked. Because they cannot financially afford that rent. If the rent is $1,000 and their income is $1,200, they clearly have gone way above their financial ability to afford that rent. The rule of thumb is whatever the rent is, their income should be 3 times that amount. So if the rent is $1,000, minimally their income should be $3,000. So if their income is only $1,200, they need to live. They may have to pay utilities. If an emergency comes up, They have to cut money from somewhere, and the first place they're going to cut money from is the rent. So I would never allow people to move in if they cannot afford it, because that will be doing them a disservice. Because if they don't pay the rent, I would be responsible for having to take them to court. And I wouldn't want to do that. So I won't allow them to set themselves up. So thank you for that question. Very good questions here. Yeah, so look at it case by case. Know what the laws are. Definitely do not discriminate. Okay. So any other questions? Let me see. All right, that's all I have here. Are there any other questions I'm able to answer while I am live? Because I definitely want to do that. All right. If not, I'm going to let you know that next Monday, when we come back at 7:30 p.m., we're going to discuss rent increases. I know that there's a big issue that a lot of you have been pondering on when to implement a rent increase, how to do it, what timeline should you notify your tenants that you are increasing the rent. I received a lot of emails pertaining to rent increases, and I'm going to take some time on next Monday to go over and discuss all of that, the timeline, what it looks like, what you should have in your letter, right? And some other tips and strategies. Okay. And again, if you have any questions, if you have any show topics that you want me to cover, please email me. Okay. Again, my email address is at the bottom of the screen there. So please feel free to email me. All right. At the end of the day, here's what I do want you to know. Today, as well as last week, I talked about conflicts and resolving issues. Listen, conflicts do not have to control you. All right. It is a business, as I've indicated before, and I'll say it time and time again. Treat your business like a business so that it can pay you like a business. When you handle disputes with confidence, you are doing yourself a good service as well as your business. Your business will thrive. All right. So I do hope that this was helpful. Thank you so much for showing up today. My time is up, and I absolutely thank you for yours. Again, that is my email address at the bottom of the screen there. Please continue to tune in. Please keep showing up. If this information is helpful, please share it with someone else. Share it with other landlords or property managers. So next week, I'm going to share information. I'm going to have tips for landlords, and I'm going to have tips for tenants. So I know that as tenants, some of you, you're looking for advice and information today. And last week, I had nothing for you, but come back next week. I'm going to share information. I'm going to have tips for you as well as a tenant. All right. Well, that's it. I'm Carissa Spann, the landlord and tenant coach. My time is up, and I absolutely thank you for yours. It has been a fantastic pleasure having you on today. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your questions. And thank you for showing up. I'll see you all next week. I'm going to say bye for now.